Thanks, and I think I have my microphone on. Yes, everybody can hear me good. Well, then let me switch over to my presentation. And I think we're there. So, good morning, everyone. So happy to be here. I think this is the first time we've had the KAR annual conference here in Manhattan. It's a beautiful facility. It's a wonderful town to be in. Hopefully everybody had a great time and will want to come back again many times. I always like coming up here to Manhattan, so it's a pleasure for me to be here as well. You can see from this year's theme, we went with the distortion theme, and we talked with my graphic designers, and I love working with them every year. And the idea this year was, think about the old tube TVs when the signal would kind of go out and everything was out of focus, and you had to tune it in to get everything right. And being able to see clearly what's going on in today's market, I think has a real clear an essential element of it is having an understanding of what normal really is, because we've been in a very distorted market actually for ever since the financial crisis. And so I'm going to talk about that today, and I'm going to talk about the things that we're seeing. So let me jump in with that. And are we going? Yes, we went there. I'm just looking at the wrong piece here on mine. Well, my little notes there are not. Let me close this out, make sure that I've got all this here. And I'm going to just rerun. There we go. I was trying to be so clever in having both of our slideshows up at the same time to be able to just swap over really quickly. Now, I needed to see my notes because I've got some cheats inside here, so we've got that set up here. First things first, the slides are posted now on the Center for Real Estate website, so you can download those. You just go to wichita.edu/real estate. So if you want those, you're free to take pictures and things as well. I welcome that. But I wanted to make sure you knew that you could access all of these. And I have to give just huge thanks. These beautiful publications we spend a lot of money to put this together, and it wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the sponsors that we have. Security First Title, Ameritrust Home Loans, Fidelity Bank, Charleston Wilson Title here in town, first time sponsor for us. We're excited about that. CapFed and Credit Union of America. For different publications in different markets, all of these are sponsors. And the supporters that we have in the industry and the service providers that help us and do such a great job of promoting the industry, I'm really, really grateful for them. And so we appreciate that. And then I have to give another huge thank you to, come along, there we go, the Kansas Association of Realtors and all of the realtor boards across the state. I think we've been in this partnership now for almost 15 years. And it's because of that partnership that we're able to work and have the data to do this forecast. And I've really enjoyed and appreciate working with all of you, that you are one of the best parts of my job, and I'm very grateful to all of you for that. So with that, I want to give a brief little talk, maybe not as long as I did last year, but discussion about the economic environment, and then see where that's leading us in with the housing forecast. So a year ago at this time, the question was, will we have a recession? That was the thing we were talking about. And I said, we weren't in a recession at the moment. I said, we might go into a recession next year. And my personal view was that if we did go into a recession, it would be a relatively mild recession. I think the question right now is, will we have a soft landing? Okay, so the Fed is starting to slow down its interest rate movements. It's put pause. It's reserved the right to increase short-term interest rates again later this year. I'm hopeful that they're done. And part of the reason that I think it's important for them to be waiting is that it really takes a long time for all of the impact of the interest rate movements that they do to really be felt through the economy. And there's a danger, just like when you're piloting a plane, you overcorrect and you're going the wrong direction, you're going up, and you need to make sure you're not going up and stall, so you push down the yoke and you're going down. And it's easy to overcorrect, and so you need to make sure that you're not doing that and heading. I'm relatively confident. This is gross domestic product growth. Anytime you're above the zero line means the economy is growing. And by the way, anytime that you see these blue shaded areas in any of my charts, those are the official dates of recessions. So we have not we've not entered a recession. There was a concern a year ago when we had these 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. You'll notice, as I said last year at this time, the recession dating committee said, no, that was not a recession. Okay, and again, one of the reasons for that is that we have had really strong employment growth. The jobs that we've seen here for the United States continues to grow at a very solid pace. 187,000 new jobs in August. I mean, really, really solid numbers that we've been seeing. Kansas, we've not been growing as fast. Our employment over the last several months has been relatively flat. But it's not uncommon for us to grow at a slower rate than the rest of the economy. So, similarly, unemployment. So the side that looks at households and people, do they have jobs? Our unemployment rates are very, very low right now. Again, near historic lows. And that isn't consistent with the notion of a recession. I'll just note a side little thing that I read recently in the Wall Street Journal. It was looking at the labor force participation rate of people 60 and over. And following the pandemic, it absolutely cratered. The number of people who said, I'm going to stay in the workforce, I'm going to keep working after the pandemic hit, labor force participation rates just plummeted for every group after the pandemic. But for those 65 and up, it came up a little bit, but not nearly to where it was before. And that's part of what helps explain the really tight labor markets that we have, is that people who might in the past have said, yeah, I'm going to keep working, I'm going to go back and stay in my job. Yes, I know I'm at retirement age, but I'm going to keep working. Now we have a lot more people who are saying, nope, I'm done with that. And that's just something we're going to have to adapt to and deal with. So a year ago at this time, I talked about the fact, why did everybody keep saying, oh, we're going to have a recession? And I mentioned this inverted yield curve where we have the short term. So this chart's really strange. So let me make sure I've made it real clear. Across the bottom here, I have different terms. 3 months, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. These are different lengths of time that the federal government borrows money. It's like the difference between a 15-year fixed rate and a 30-year fixed rate. Okay? And ordinarily, we think that a long-term interest rate should be higher than a short-term interest rate, just like a 30-year versus a fixed 15-year mortgage. We're comfortable with that. The lines on here, the blue line is about a week ago, last week when I pulled the data. The red line is 6 months ago, and the green line are the interest rates for these different terms 1 year ago. And again, in a normal financial market, we typically think that we will have, this is called the yield curve, and we think that we would have an upward sloping yield curve where longer term rates are higher than short term rates. And I mentioned a year ago that we were at this place where we now have a downward sloping yield curve. And that is used by some economists as a predictor of a recession in the future. And I said it's not really a predictor of a recession. It is instead a predictor that in short-term interest rates will fall in the future. And one reason that might happen is that we have a recession and the Fed lowers interest rates, okay? But it could also happen because we have a reduction in inflation. And that was the other one we talked about. Well, look where we've gone now this year. Compared to just a year ago, short-term interest rates up above 5.5%. Long-term interest rates, say the 10-year Treasury, still quite a bit higher than where we were last year. The yield curve is incredibly inverted. Nevertheless, I think that we are likely to avoid a recession. I'm very hopeful for that soft landing that we expect. And what's been driving up those short-term interest rates is the Fed just kept jacking up and jacking up and jacking up the Fed funds rate, which affects the short end of the market much more. My hope and expectation is that over the next year, interest rates, those short-term interest rates, I'm expecting at least over the next 6 months that it will stay flat, and then later next year they will begin lowering, but they'll lower at a very modest, even pace. So what does that then translate? So why do I think that? I think that because we've really gotten inflation mostly under control. Right now we're in a place where we're at about 3.5% overall inflation. And the green line, I talked about this in depth last year, is this measure of what financial markets believe the inflation rate will be on average over the next 5 years. And if you look at that, that is just barely above the Fed's 2% inflation target. That's within a margin of error. If we hit that level of inflation, the Fed will say, yes, we've achieved our goal. We're in that sweet spot range of about 2%. The big question is whether or not, suppose that we stabilize here, where we've got inflation that sits between, say, 3 and 3.5%, and it stabilizes there over the next 6 months. Will the Fed say, you know what? This is a good place to be in. We are going to work slowly to try and bring it back down to the 2%, but we're not going to try and really drive interest rates to really clamp things down. Does that make sense? I'm hopeful that they will take the former approach, where they're going to say, let's just whittle it away now. We've dealt with the big long-term expectation issue. If we can just get it down a little bit over the next couple of years, that'll work for us. If instead they say we got to get it there by the end of next year, then we will see more interest rate increases and we could see more economic turmoil. I'm hopeful for the former, but we will have to see. The one thing that's been really interesting to me here recently has been how high mortgage rates are compared to the 10-year Treasury. The 10-year Treasury is often used as a benchmark for other interest rates to see what's been happening here. And so the red line on these charts is the 10-year Treasury rate. The blue line is the 30-year fixed mortgage rate. And what you can see is that typically what we do is we bounce around about a 2% premium. That the 30-year fixed mortgage rate is typically about 2%, give or take, it varies, higher than the 10-year Treasury. And right now, we're sitting at a place where we're about 3% higher than the 10-year Treasury. And that is the highest level that we've seen since the late 1980s for this spread. I'm not sure what's driving that, okay? But it gives me hope that that will be a transitory situation. Sorry. It's a lot of econ speak in here, so let me see if I can get this straight. I expect that what we will see is over time the Fed is going to lower the short-term interest rates, but I don't think the 10-year Treasury is going to come down much. It's actually in a place right now that is much more in the range, this 10-year Treasury is in the range that it was in back prior to the financial crisis, okay? I think it's been abnormally low ever since the financial crisis back in 2008. And so I think the 10-year Treasury is back at a more normal rate. So if the 10-year Treasury doesn't go down, how do we have room for mortgage rates to come down? It would be if this mortgage risk premium comes back down to its more normal range. And if it does that, that would allow us to get down closer to a 6% interest rate than where we are right now. So that is my hope. It's not just my hope. It is also what the National Association of Realtors is forecasting. Oops, I had thought I'd fixed that slide. This forecast is actually the National Association of Realtors forecast. Many of you know I've done the Mortgage Bankers Association's forecast in past years. The Mortgage Bankers Association, when I went to press, was still forecasting rates to drop down to about 4.5%. And I said, no, I just don't believe that. And I don't want to forecast mortgage rates myself, but the NAR was forecasting it to 6%. And I said, that's in the ballpark I can believe. And Mortgage Bankers has since upped their rate, and I think their forecast for the end of next year is like 5.8%. So they're much closer in line with one another now compared to where they were when we went to press. So I'm very hopeful that mortgage rates, I don't see anything on the horizon. The thing that would cause us to go up higher than about 7.5% would be inflation ticking up. I think we've got inflation mostly under control, and expected inflation what the markets are expecting seems to be much lower. So that's not going to cause mortgage rates to go up. And if anything, if this risk premium declines, that should give us room for mortgage rates to fall over the next year or so. So that's my expectation with that. Good news? You like that? Went one slide too many there. There we go. So home sales activity, it's way down. I mean, it's down 15% year to date through August across the state. That's the lowest we've had through the first 8 months of the year since 2012. So our correction that we've had has been correction is not the right word. Our downturn that we've had has been much more severe than I anticipated we'd have when market rates went up. And it's certainly been painful. But the real framework and the real thing to keep in mind with all of this is that active listings are still really tight. And again, I wanted to give this long-term perspective with this. So going all the way back to 2010 across the state, we had well over 15, almost 20,000 listings back in 2010, 2011. That was a market where we had an oversupply of homes. But we whittled it down, and we were around 10,000 homes available for sale on the market prior to the pandemic. And now we're still only in a place where we're about 5,000 homes. And this is true across every market in the state, whether you're talking, large cities like Kansas City and Wichita, or you're talking about small communities, Garden City or Pittsburgh. Wherever we go, we're seeing this really tight inventories compared to what we've seen historically. This is why I don't think, there are some people who looked at the rapid price appreciation that we had over the last couple of years, and they looked at the increase in interest rates and they said, oh my goodness, the housing market is going to fall apart. It's going to be 2008 all over again. And anybody who says that just really doesn't know anything about housing markets, because any markets, it's about supply and demand. Yes, demand is down. Supply is still really limited. We see that in other measures. We are far below what is needed to have a balanced market. You can't see my little shading that I have here with this projector, but typically we think of a balanced market as being between a 4 and a 6 months supply. And we haven't been there in Kansas since going back to 2015. And even though we've come up over the last couple of years, We've come from a 1-month supply to a 2-month supply. And so that's still an incredibly tight market. Homes are selling very quickly. Median days on market that we've had here across the state, still under 10 days. So that's really, really fast. And even though the amount of negotiations that we're seeing, what percentage of homes are selling at a price below the original list price has come up a little bit, it's still well below the normal level that I think of as about 60%. 60% of homes that sell at a discount to original list, that's what we've seen in a more balanced market era. And we're still well below that. So what is our sales forecast? Our forecast is that we will end the year down about 12.4%, basically kind of the pace that we have been on here. But I think the worst is over. And our forecast for next year is essentially flat in terms of home sales activity. The factor that's really driving this is the supply side of the market, not the demand side of the market. I think that we're seeing home buyers in that situation adapt to the new interest rate environment and deal with that, but they have to have something to be able to buy. And so, what does that mean for home prices? People will look at charts like this, and sometimes they'll look at this and they'll say, oh my goodness, look how much home prices are falling. No, pay attention to the axis, right? This is what we as economists, econ teachers teach. Read the axis. If somebody doesn't show you what's on the left-hand side that you're measuring against and what's across the bottom. So we have time and we have percent. This is the year-over-year percent change in U.S. and Kansas typical home values. And yes, we were up at a place where we topped out at about 17% average annualized home price appreciation. It has slowed down, but the key line here is this line at the bottom, 0. If these are above 0, we are still appreciating. Home values are still going up. And so we are forecasting that home price appreciation will slow. On average this year, we think we'll end 2023 at a 5.5% increase for Kansas, and then moderate a little bit more to 3.5% in 2024. For the state of Kansas, 3.5%, when you're in a situation where inflation is coming down to 2%, 2.5%, that's a good, normal appreciation rate for the state of Kansas. We aren't going to see any significant price declines, and I know there are some people who wish that they could get something a little cheaper, but we aren't going to see the rapid acceleration that we've had in the past years. It's going to be more normal, back to a real normal. So the last things that I wanted to talk about was dealing with the supply side of the market and how do we address that. And the market that was impacted more by the increase in interest rates than anything else was new home construction. And in talking with home builders across the state, it really, really, really impacted the lower end homes that they were able to construct. The demand in that part of the market has collapsed. The home buyers that are still out there for new homes typically are custom homes. They are typically high-end homes, and they are people who have cash and they're willing to pay, and the change in interest rates didn't affect them as much. But when you coupled the price increases that we've seen for construction costs along with the higher interest rates, it just really priced out that $350,000 to $450,000, $500,000 home market. That's really been pinched with the new home construction. And so you can see here, we never recovered back to where we were in the 90s and 2000s in new home construction, and we've dropped way down here over the last year or so. It turns out that adding multifamily, so if we add in apartments and duplexes and triplexes, it really doesn't make that much better. And why do I look at that? Well, I forecast single-family residential new home construction. But any housing unit that somebody moves into, whether it's owner-occupied or renter-occupied, moves one household into a housing unit, and it eases the inventory across every other part of the market. Apartments being built actually help ease our inventory problems in the single-family residential market as well. And so even though we've had a ton of apartment building over the last few years, it's still well below where we were back in the late 90s and early 2000s in terms of our home building construction. How many housing units are we constructing? And so that remains a challenge for us. So our forecast for this year is that new home construction will be down a little more than 18% to 4,700 units. I'm actually hopeful that we'll see a slight rebound next year. If this is really predicated that mortgage rates do fall the way that the NAR has forecasted, but if mortgage rates do fall from 7 to 7.5% down closer to 6%, that's going to make a difference in some of those more modest, if you can call those lower end new homes modest price points. It'll make a difference in those modest price points that will help bring some of those buyers back into that market. And so we're projecting a modest increase, about a 4% increase. It's still significantly below where we've been the last few years, but at least it's turning back in the right direction. And so that is our overall forecast for this year. And I wanted to make sure that I left time for a lot of questions. So I am ready to answer your questions. Yes?
Do you feel like with the super low interest rates and the COVID stimulus money that we stole some of the houses that would have sold maybe this year, next year, or the next 2 years?
Yeah, so the question is whether or not the things that happened in the wake of the pandemic, which was the Fed took strong actions to actually directly bring down mortgage rates by purchasing mortgage-backed securities. And then you had all the stimulus checks, and all of that really juiced up demand in the housing market. And so were some of the sales that we saw that happened over 2020 and 2021, was that really a stealing sales from today? And I think the answer to that is yes. If we averaged out, over that period of time, we're really kind of more on the pace where we were prior to the pandemic. And that pace that we had prior to the pandemic, that was already a place where we were constrained. If you'll recall, back in 2019, we were forecasting that home sales would be essentially flat because of the inventory shortages. Okay, so I do think that what we did is we stole some of the buyers from there, and that'll affect us. But again, I think we're close to coming through the rest of that. Other questions? Yes?
Theoretically, it shouldn't, but does an election year play into how economic figures make their predictions? Will anything crazy happen because for manipulation of the market?
So the question is, will the upcoming election have any impact on things? And there are a lot of different ways that might happen. The first one, you said something about manipulation of the market or manipulation of the data. One of the things that's been we're very blessed here in the United States in that our economic data sources that we have through the federal government are very institutionalized to not be impacted by political moves. And so when the Bureau of the Census reports the building permit numbers, when the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports numbers about employment or unemployment rate and those things, those numbers are not really subject. We can count on them as being correct no matter what the political influences may be from a party that's in power or not in power. Okay, so that's not a concern. The second question with that would be, does the election impact buyer sentiment or any of those things? And, I know that all of you tend to believe that it has an impact, and I trust your experiences and judgment on those things. That being said, never been able to tease anything out to really see anything that you could identify as being a election year effect, either before elections or after elections or things like that. I think for the most part, households are driven to home purchase and selling decisions based on things that happen in their lives, and that's most of the time not affected by any political election cycles that are going on. But again, you talk with buyers and sellers, and so I don't discount the experiences that you have. Other questions? Yes?
So, you say the worst is over, but I don't know if I necessarily believe that. At least going into the winter, so when will you see actually starting to take in a better direction? Because at least from what I'm seeing right now, with the last month with the interest rate really becoming another percent, we're really seeing buyers back off. So, in my mind, we're starting a little bit early. So I think.
So the question was, you say the worst is over, but when is it going to start getting better? Because I'm not seeing it yet. And I do think one thing that becomes a real challenge with all of this is separating out seasonality and things that the normal cycle that we have in the housing market versus what is an underlying real trend that's happening. That's a hard point. That's why in all these graphs I put in moving averages to get a sense of what's the sort of typical with all of these things. Again, I'm not forecasting that home sales are going to increase next year. What I'm really projecting is that we're not going to see another decline next year. And but we shall see. If I was going to say, when will you feel better about it? I think that hopefully you will feel better about it as you get into the spring selling season, and that you will feel those things. But it will depend on a lot of individual things, and different markets can be different. So I had another hand that was over here. Yeah.
You just kind of addressed it, and I'm just curious if any of our markets are an exception to what you're seeing, or are we all kind of in the same boat?
The one market that I think has been a little bit different than the other markets across the state, Manhattan has been kind of unique over the last several years and really has had some different perspectives. Their home sales we're actually forecasting will increase next year, but I don't have my pictures of that, but if you pick up the Manhattan book in the back and you look at those compared to some of the other markets, they've had some different patterns in terms of their home sales activity and their home price appreciation and their inventory numbers. They've been a little bit different from the rest of the state. Some similar underlying trends, but not they didn't increase at the same pace over the last several years in terms of home price appreciation. Their construction has had some different constraints to it. So that would be the market that I would say is different. But I don't have anything in this here to really talk about all those differences. So, other questions? Well, let me ask you a question, which is, one of the big questions that we have here with what interest rates were over the last many years is to the extent that home buyers are locked in. So if I'm an existing home, I own a home already, I was either able to buy at a really low interest rate or I refinanced into a low interest rate. And to what extent are they people who would have been buyers in the past? They'd like to move and change, but they just can't pass up their really good 3% interest rate to move in, even maybe at 6%. And so to what extent do you hear and see people acting locked in? And what percentage of I think the people who bought over the last couple of years, anybody who buys now is locked in for a few years regardless, right? So we're really talking about people who maybe bought in the late teens and were now, they've refinanced into a low interest rate. But now something's happened in their life and they would otherwise say, it's time to upsize, it's time to downsize, it's time to change, but are not doing it. How much do you see it? Yeah.
So in my market area, south of Kansas City, my county, I don't think that's a big factor because we still go back to the inventory issue. If someone wants to downsize, upsize, right size, whatever they want to do, if the property is available, I believe that they will purchase it. But
Even though they'll give up their good interest rate.
yeah, I truly believe that. Life changes and the reason why people purchase or sell is because of life changes normally. So, if they have to trade a couple of % interest rates, I don't think that's making a difference.
Anybody have anecdotes that are different from that? Yeah.
I'm hearing about it every day. People who, I don't want to trade with 2% for 7. One of the tires I've done of that is, keep the house at 2% just buy it.
That'll fix our inventory problems, won't it? Yeah. Natalie?
Statistic, and I can't remember if it was a Tom Ferry thing or something, that 70% of the mortgage holders currently have around 100% interest rate. Do you have any insight on that?
I don't know that I've seen those numbers. I would have to, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac probably have some statistics. I haven't looked at those. The question that I always come back to when I think about, to what extent will we have lock-in and that's going to really tamp down demand going forward. I don't know, I don't see any faces that seem old enough to know what happened in the 70s and early 80s. I'm not going to accuse anybody of being those faces. But this is not a new situation. We had a time in the past when mortgage rates were a heck of a lot higher than they are now, and we had, maybe they didn't have 3% rates that they had locked in, but maybe they'd locked in at 6%, and now mortgage rates are 12% or 18%, and people still did transactions. People still did deals. And again, it's where I come back with you, Kathy, of that it's about what is your personal life situation, and that's what drives most people for their real estate transactions. There was a time in the early 2000s when it seemed like some people bought new homes the way I buy new shoes, but it's the new style. But I don't think that's generally been true. Did you have something you wanted to say, John?
Only that the market will adjust. It always has. Even when interest rates, the 1-year adjustment of mortgage rates was 12.5. 30-year fixed was 17.75. And you would say nobody's going to buy a house with those rates. They still don't know. The market takes time. It takes time to adjust, and it'll settle in at 6, number 7, but you just don't know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cash in the market. Interest rates don't affect cash buyers or owners that have no mortgage. So that's what I've seen also.
And I thought I saw one more hand over here. Did I see it?
Back in the day, they had a lot of silent racks. Remember those?
Silent what?
Racks. They would keep the first mortgage. They didn't even notify the lender. And back then, there wasn't any great way for lenders to track it. But they would just wrap the mortgage. We would have signed a hold harmless that they knew it could be called. And that went on for years and years.
Silent wraparound mortgages. Yeah.
Not a contract deed, which is really dangerous because they couldn't call.
Right.
I had lots of business with that.
Yeah. Yes.
As you traveled around the state and you had your roundtables, was there much discussion on how the amount of homes that become Airbnbs have affected inventory in different markets? I know, like in Manhattan specifically, we've got the city estimates we've got roughly 375 Airbnbs, and when you look at our units for our MSA that sold, if you had an extra,
Yeah, so the question was about Airbnbs and in the roundtable events and things that we had back in August, how much people talked about how Airbnbs are impacting the owner-occupied stock and the inventories. And so a couple things with that. Number one is when a house is purchased by an investor to be an exclusive, this is going to be a short-term rental as opposed to a long-term rental. Let me make a distinction here. But those short-term rentals, that does pull a housing unit out of the housing stock of homes that are available for people to live in on an ongoing basis. One of the things that's really challenging with it is that a lot of the Airbnbs are not exclusively, so you might buy a house and you might put it out as an Airbnb. I might own my house, live here, and rent out a room as an Airbnb. And those are both showing up in those listings. And when I do that, that actually increases some inventory of things that are out there because I'm taking an underutilized asset, a house that I have. My dad used to complain about, the rents that people would charge. And I would say, well, Dad, you're charging infinitely high rents. You've got these spare bedrooms in your house and you're not letting anybody live there. And so don't complain about the rents that some landlord is charging if you're not willing to rent your rooms as well. But that's an underutilized asset, right? And so those are different places, and it's hard to tell with the numbers on the Airbnbs. It is a concern in the short term in terms of inventories when you have somebody buy a property and completely pull it out for somebody to live in long term, and it's only available as a short-term rental. In the long term, however, as John said, markets adjust. That just is a change in demand for the number of housing units that we need to have. Does that make sense? And so it doesn't make things easier in the short term, but in the long term, we should be able to adapt to it. It's certainly going to affect places like Manhattan. One of the things we know about short-term rentals is that it is tourist destination places that they have the biggest impact on the market. And so, the question is whether or not, 8 football games or how many football games a year home games we have with K-State are going to be enough to drive that. Maybe basketball season's upping things so that you have that demand as well. But there's a limit to how much that short-term rental. And one of the comments we had, I will say, from people who were actually involved in the short-term rental business is they said, we could actually see a lot of people who are in this business who go back and they resell them because they aren't making what they thought they'd make. Yeah.
I wonder if Lawrence in particular, KU's football has gotten better, and I wonder if they've seen an increase in the Airbnbs, because I've seen comments in social media that you can't get a hotel from Kansas City to Topeka now when KU has a football game. So I'm curious if they've seen an increase in it as well.
And coming from Wichita State, where the joke always used to be that Wichita State can't have a football team until KU has one as well. It does seem strange to see, and exciting, but it seems strange to have KU have a good football team there. Remember, football it's big on those days, but those minimal dates aren't enough to support an investor who does it. I think I saw your hand first, then yours, so go ahead.
So I'm curious to get your insights or interpretation of this, where you see 2019, 21, we have more number of home sales go on in, but we're seeing the number of active listings go down, short of inventory essentially.
Yeah, so when we went back into, after the pandemic, and I said, going into it, we said the sales will be flat because we don't have inventory. And then, wow. I don't know how you found homes to sell during all of that time, but but that's what drove this really, really crazy market where you had, making offers that were 20% above asking price, and you had to get it within 2 hours, or else you missed out. I mean, it was amazing and weird.
So I guess my question is it more of a shortage of inventory or shortage of money to buy the inventory available?
It is more a shortage of inventory. I mean, I think certainly buyers are affected by the higher interest rates. Qualification for mortgages and doing that is not, we haven't seen a real tightening of underwriting standards in terms of saying, oh, we're not going to make loans. It's simply that, you know, the only real tightening you've had is, oh, now your debt to, you know, your total debt ratio is now getting difficult, so you're limited on what you're able to afford. But it's more the side of the inventory than it is the.
Do you track to say like how many listings go on the market, don't sell, but it's still there? You know, the higher homes that get listed and then sold.
Yeah, we have those data. There's not been anything that I've noticed that has had significant changes in those things, but I haven't looked at it recently. Very interesting. Thank you. Well, I think that my time is basically up, and so I want to make sure that I'm respecting all the events and everything we have. Please give a big thank you again to all of the sponsors for these housing forecasts. I will be traveling to many of your markets across the state over the next few weeks, and so if you have an opportunity to see things where I'm talking specifically about your markets, then I hope to see you there. Encourage your agents and colleagues who could not be here today to come and join us there. I think next week I'll be in Lawrence and Topeka. I'll be in Kansas City later next month. And then I'll be in a lot of smaller markets, Emporia, Hayes, Dodge City, Pittsburgh, Salina. So looking forward to seeing all of you as we go out. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.